Welcome back to this Thursday edition of Focal Point AFR Talk. A couple of quick things. I want to play those sound bites about Ted Cruz. I don't know if you know about this, but there is actually a plan that's gaining some traction to split California into 6 separate states. There's a wealthy businessman in California by the name of Tim Draper, and he's collected enough signatures, and they have been validated by the Secretary of State. So this ballot initiative now is going to be voted on by the people of California. They will have an opportunity. Well, he's got to collect the signatures first. The initiative language has been approved, so now they got to go out and collect the signatures. They got to get 800,000 signatures to get this measure on the ballot in November. I believe they'll collect them. I believe there's so much agitation in the American people about tyranny, and especially people live in Northern California, Central California, all these liberals in Sacramento making all these decisions that affect their lives. I think they want change. So I don't think they have any trouble getting the signatures for this thing. So they could vote to split California into 6 states. Now, that would have to be approved by Congress. But if they vote and they say, yeah, we want California to be split into 6 separate states, that would then go to Congress to decide whether to approve of that or not. Now, we've talked before about the number of amount of ammunition that the Department of Homeland Security has. Well, here's a story, CNS News today. The Department of Homeland Security has contracted to purchase another 704 million rounds of ammo over the next 4 years. That's 2,500 rounds of ammo per officer. 704 million rounds of ammunition for the Department of Homeland Security. And as of October 2013, they already had in their inventory 159 million rounds of ammunition on hand. All right, so that is going on out there. Now, the agitation, Thomas Sowell, critical now of Ted Cruz, thinks he's just out for himself. And Ted Cruz is the only one that fought on the debt ceiling. He forced the Republican senators to vote to raise the debt ceiling. He forced them to do it. They couldn't dodge it. See, what they wanted to do is they knew this thing was going to pass without any Republican votes if it got to the floor. So they didn't want this thing filibustered, because if it's not filibustered, then it goes to the floor. All 55 Democrats vote for it. All 45 Republicans vote against it. And then they can go home and say to their constituents, I voted against the raise in the debt ceiling. I'm looking out for you. I'm a champion for smaller government. I'm a warrior in the fight against this out-of-control debt. And so Ted Cruz knew they were going to do that. It was going to be completely sham, totally false. So he said, I'm not going to let you guys get away with that. If you're going to raise the debt ceiling, write a blank check to Barack Obama, you're going to have to go on record. And so 11 Republicans, to their shame, this thing we wouldn't have an increase in the debt ceiling if it were not for Republican votes. Who flushed him out of the weeds? It was Ted Cruz that flushed him out of the weeds. So, I like the way he's fighting to control spending better than the way the rest of Republicans don't. And Thomas Sowell, I don't care. At this point, I don't even care what deep motive is driving him. You think it's grandstanding? I think maybe he cares about the Constitution and his country. But regardless, only God knows the answer to that question. What I do know is that he's the only guy out there that is fighting to stop this runaway train. Now, Ann Coulter, this is clip number 3. Ann Coulter has kind of gone over to the dark side of the force. She's now joined the Karl Rove wing of the Republican Party, and here's what she had to say about Ted Cruz and the Senate Conservatives Fund. This is Jim DeMint. Jim DeMint is another one of my heroes. Jim DeMint is now head of the Heritage Foundation. He started a thing called the Senate Conservatives Fund. They're out there to get rid of undocumented Democrats that are wearing our label in the Senate, the so-called rhinos, get rid of them, and put genuine conservatives in the Senate. That's the Senate Conservatives Fund. This is a genuine, hardcore conservative effort led by Jim DeMint. And Ted Cruz is kind of the prime example of the good that they can do. So let's listen to Ann Coulter. She has now joined the Karl Rove wing of the Republican Party.
there are two ways of looking at it. The people out in America who call themselves Tea Partiers are fantastic. They're the heart of America, and I think they've made a huge difference. They did in the 2010 elections, which in the House anyway, Republicans picked up more seats than they did in the famous 1994 election. That was a huge win, but we also lost a lot of Senate seats, and unfortunately, as with any grassroots movement, I think there are a lot of con men and scamsters coming in and tricking good Americans into sending them money, claiming we are fighting for you, and they aren't fighting for you.
Listen, the people that I know are there in the trenches every day. This is what they do.
No, the ones out in America, yeah, but a lot of them, I think, and a lot of the rich ones are
I don't know what the rich groups are.
Basically, anyone who claims to be going after establishment Republicans, the key word there is Republican. That means the media won't get on their back and look at their finances, and it also means Republican. If we don't elect Republicans, I don't care which Republican, we will not repeal Obamacare. You know, I've said it so much, I'm getting to be like you, Hannity. The only way to repeal Obamacare is to elect Republicans. It is not to be fighting against Republicans.
Listen, I think.
And by the way, I never push anyone else's column but mine. Today, everyone has got Thomas Sowell's article.
All right.
So she cites Thomas Sowell's article, the one that I referred to, where he's critical of Ted Cruz. So. And Coulter, you know, and the question becomes then, all right, we've got to elect Republicans to repeal Obamacare. Well, what good is it to elect Republicans that will not fight on these issues? If they're going to roll over and play dead every time a difficult vote comes up on the debt ceiling or to defund Obamacare, how in the world can you expect them to stand up and be counted on repealing Obamacare? That's a pipe dream. So it's not just any Republican. It's got to be a certain kind of, because a lot of the Republicans are undocumented Democrats. So there's Ann Coulter. She's officially now an undocumented Democrat in the Republican Party, part of the Karl Rove wing. Ted Cruz, Senate Conservatives Funds. She just calls them con men and scamsters, shysters. That's Ann Coulter's word now for Ted Cruz. He's a con man. He is a shyster. Senate Conservatives Fund. They are just a bunch of scamsters. Anybody that is going after establishment Republicans. I never thought that I would hear Ann Coulter say something like this in my life. You know, I've always looked at her at kind of Xena, the warrior princess. I mean, she's going to take no prisoners. She's going to stand for the truth. She's going to stand against the establishment if they're off in the weeds. And here she is saying if anybody's going after establishment Republicans, they're the enemy. We can't have people going after establishment Republicans. So Ted Cruz, therefore, is just a con man. Never thought I would live to see the day. Now, here's Ted Cruz, clip 4. Ted Cruz talking about the fact that he smoked out the undocumented Democrats in the Republican Party on the vote on the debt ceiling. He made them be counted. And that's why they don't like him. That's why John Karl's saying he's going to have a food tester when he sits down with the Republicans. They despise Ted Cruz because he is exposing them for the cowards and the unprincipled politicians that they are. Here is his comment.
I think last week actually is a perfect illustration of everything that's wrong with Washington. Republican leadership said we want this to pass, but if every senator affirmatively consents to doing it on 51 votes, then we can all cast a vote no, and we can go home to our constituents and say we opposed it. And listen, that sort of show vote, that sort of trickery to the constituents is why Congress has a 13% approval rating.
So what Ted Cruz talking with Dana Basher, what Ted Cruz is saying, look, if there's anybody's a con man here, it's not me. The con men are these Republicans that are sandbagging the American people, casting a meaningless vote against the debt ceiling, knowing that it is destined to fail. And he said, I'm not going to put up with that kind of trickery. I'm not going to put up with that shyster business, that scamster business, that con artistry. I'm going to call them out. Number to call, 888-589-8840 is the number to call, 888-589-8840. Rob, let's grab clip number 5. Mike Rowe, he's the dirty jobs guy. He was on Fox and Friends yesterday. He's had a 7-year contract with Ford Motor Company. Now he's branching out because he wants to talk more in general about jobs and the work ethic in America. And so this guy spent 7 years doing these dirty jobs, going around doing a show on that, being a spokesman for the Ford Motor Company. So he's talked to a lot of employers. He's been in a lot of businesses. He's been in a lot of places. And he says, look, you know what's missing? What is missing is the old-fashioned American work ethic. Let's listen.
One of the disconnects, at least in my life, was from 2003 when Dirty Jobs started right up until last year when it ended. The headlines, certainly on this show and in every major media outlet, were about unemployment, no jobs. Unemployment, no jobs. All the jobs are gone. Everywhere I went on Dirty Jobs, I mean everywhere, help wanted signs. At the height of the recession, it was help wanted. And so there was just, from my experience, something going on in the country that people really weren't talking about. And I engaged employers wherever I could find them. And in all 50 states, I heard the same thing again and again. If you're willing to learn a truly useful skill, and really, no kidding, work your butt off, you're still okay. We're desperate for those people. Yeah. So, it's a different element to the narrative we typically hear, but it's real.
Right. Now, tell me what you think, and I think it's building on what you just said. What do you think is the biggest problem facing our country right now? Is it basically what you just said? People not working hard or not finding the right jobs and not seeing that as a valuable occupation?
Yeah, well, look, to be fair, and again, I'm no economist, but I feel like there are two separate conversations going on in the country. One conversation is about workers and parity and how we can improve conditions. The other conversation really talks about the definition of a good job, the meaning of work, the willingness to see what a lot of people might call a bad job and only see an opportunity.
So what Mike Rowe is saying, this is profound. He's saying what built America was that people would look at a job. Maybe it didn't pay very much, but it was an entry-level job. It got them into the labor force. It got them into the workforce. It got them a job. They began to develop some skills and experience that they could translate into better jobs and higher wages. So they did not disdain a low-paying entry-level job because it was the first rung on the ladder of financial security and independence. Now, because welfare benefits are so generous, and this is why it just grieves me that we're doing this to the American people, there are no jobs that Americans will not do. There are jobs that Americans on welfare will not do because they can make more by staying home than getting their hands dirty and starting a working career. Focal Point AFR Talk. We'll be back in 2.